Welcome back. We're talking about torture and how effective it is in getting information, plus what other ways are there to interrogate suspects. Joining me are Matthew Alexander, a U.S. Air Force major who led the interrogation team in Iraq in 2006 that ultimately led to the killing of the leader of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. And we have attorney David Riz Khan, an expert in international law who served in the Reagan and George H.W. Bush administrations. So let's get back to our questions. And actually, Mr. Riz Khan, perhaps this is an important point. You mentioned it's important to differentiate torture and coercive techniques as well. At what point do we define what is torture and what isn't?
Torture is actually a broad but fairly clear definition of torture. Torture is infliction of severe physical or mental pain and suffering. And it's easier to define severe physical pain and suffering than mental one. But again, waterboarding, most forms of waterboarding to me certainly do qualify as torture. But a use of stress positions, modicum of sleep deprivation, if you cannot sleep for 8 or 10 hours, unpleasant, but it's not torture. Loud music being played, a diet that's not tremendously exciting, maybe things are a little colder, a little warmer in your detention area.
We had an email, if I can put this to you please, Matthew Alexander, that came in from Paula Varley, a regular contributor in Norwich in the UK, who says, I feel very uncomfortable with the title of your book, How to Break a Terrorist, and I can't help suspecting some of the terrorists you believe have broken will turn out to be taxi drivers and the like. When you are breaking them, they are suspects. It is your actions that turn the suspects into a terrorist because you force them to admit what you want to hear. I guess what we're getting at here is, could the problem with interrogation be that those asking questions sort of stubbornly looking for specific answers, irrespective of whether or not those are factual?
Yeah, let me clarify the title, How to Break a Terrorist. Break in interrogator lingo means a breakthrough,
right, okay.
Not physically breaking somebody. It means breaking through that initial resistance towards cooperation. And so in interrogator lingo, we call that a break, and that's where the title comes from. But as far as, are you going to use techniques that are so effective you're going to get somebody innocent to confess to something they didn't do? I would point people out, there's a story in my book about this. There's a man who was captured that was brought to me with some fairly significant or very accurate intelligence information that he was involved in the insurgency. And it turns out in the end he was innocent. And but that situation wasn't any different than when I was a criminal investigator and we brought somebody in who was falsely accused but didn't know, and we had to put them through an intense interrogation, but we didn't resort to torture. And so it's okay, I think, to use intense interrogation techniques. But it's wrong to use torture. And you're certainly, I don't think, going to make somebody confess to something they didn't do.
Well, in fact, what Mohammed in Somalia, I think, was getting at before the break was saying that, do you believe that what's being done in Iraq is genocide? And using the term genocide, again, like the term torture, as we were discussing with Mr. Riz Khan, it depends on interpretation. At what point do you decide what is torture? What's your threshold?
I just had this conversation with one of my former interrogators about what is the definition and where does it fall. I know within me what's torture because I grew up with certain values, and so I can put a definition on that. I can use Geneva Conventions as a guide also, and also the U.S. Army has regulations about what they consider to be torture. The Army lawyers, the JAGs, give us definitions of what's allowable or not allowable. But the basic rule I always fall back to, as a first-line supervisor watching interrogations and making the decision, is what would I be okay with my troops being subjected to if they were captured? And if it crosses that line, then I say that's torture.
Okay. Mr. Riz Khan, has the post 9/11 era, the so-called war on terror, has that changed the rules in your opinion? Has that redefined what should and shouldn't be used in terms of getting intelligence?
Of course it has, for two reasons. The imperatives, the stakes are quite different now. Let's be clear. One of the reasons we have an enormously humane system for dealing with criminals, because even the worst ordinary criminals, even the worst rapists and child molesters and serial killers do not threaten the basic survival of our body politic. Individuals engage in mass casualty terrorism, particularly if they get their hands on WMD, do. As a policy proposition, different. As a legal proposition, with all due respect to Matthew, the golden rule does not work like this. The rules apply very much, different rules apply depending on who you are. Rules do apply, nobody's in a law-free zone, but the way lawful combatants who become POWs upon capture are treated is different from the way criminal suspects are treated and from the way unlawful combatants are treated. To me, it is enormously restrictive, unduly restrictive to say we want our soldiers to be treated the same way as individuals we capture in this war.
Let me make a comment on that.
Mm-hmm. And it's not true as a matter of law or history, by the way.
Let me say that my opinion on that, and what I taught my troops, is we don't change based on the status of who we capture, who we interrogate. We're Americans. And so we should adhere to American principles. I don't care what the status of that person is. Why would my actions or who I am or what I believe in that's ethical or non-ethical change based on who I've captured or how they were fighting us? And so I think we abide by one standard no matter what the status is of the person we've captured.
Let me just point out one thing. What you're fundamentally missing is this. It's not a question about values. The values remain the same. The specific legal paradigm is different. POWs have a legal right to keep secrets. You cannot interrogate, let's be clear, you cannot interrogate POWs at all. At all. That is, in fact, the true application of Geneva Convention. You can interrogate unlawful enemy combatants. With POWs, you cannot even offer them a cigarette or oranges in an effort to positively incentivize them. So what you're basically doing is you are prepared to squeeze POWs more than you should, and you are prepared to squeeze unlawful combatants less than you're entitled to, which is kind of a crazy legal approach to this.
Let's get a quick call in here. Hamad in Saudi Arabia is back. Hamad, what would you like to ask?
My name is Hamad, and I would just like to ask two things mainly. Please. My first question was regarding the habeas corpus and the civil liberties. I want to ask you about whether or not, whether this, why aren't you using this? And this are for the prisoners currently held in Guantanamo Bay and all these areas of prisons. My second question is regarding why are they always held as guilty until proven innocent rather than innocent until proven guilty? And why does not this change in our society? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ahmed. I guess, Mr. Rifkin, one of the issues is Guantanamo has changed perceptions of how America treats justice. How would you answer some of the issues that Ahmed raised there?
Well, it's gotten an enormously bad rap. I've been to Guantanamo twice, obviously not as a detainee. I can tell you from my experience in the Justice Department, the conditions in Guantanamo are better than any federal penitentiary I've ever seen in terms of inmate and inmate violence, the level of medical care, et cetera, et cetera. But there's a fundamental misunderstanding here. Under the laws of war, the legal architecture, it's not a question of guilt or innocence. If you're captured and in a situation where we believe that you're an enemy combatant and you're not a lawful enemy combatant, you're entitled to be interrogated, and in both instances, lawful and unlawful, you'll be entitled to be held for duration of hostilities. It has nothing to do with guilt and innocence. These rules are, the problem is that people don't take seriously the proposition that this is war. It doesn't strike them as intuitively correct.
But isn't the danger that, for example, American troops in Iraq could be seen by people in that region as unlawful enemy combatants, invaders, and therefore be held under similar circumstances in a similar detention camp in the same location?
To be honest, first of all, let's be candid here. Every American soldier that has been captured in Iraq and Afghanistan, to the best of my knowledge, has been, unless he was rescued, horribly, at a medieval level, brutalized and killed. So I personally think if I were fighting in Iraq or Afghanistan, I would love to see that the worst thing happened to me upon capture. He's been put in a place like Guantanamo. But second of all, again, this to me is not the real problem. The application of a rule should not be driven by subjectivity. It's not a question of whether you're an invader or not. Whether you're a lawful and unlawful combatant is driven by objective criteria. If you wear your uniform openly, if you bear arms openly, if you make an institutional commitment to comply with the laws of war, you are a lawful combatant, even if you're fighting for a cause Matthew and I disagree. It's not a subjective thing.
Let me get from Matthew Alexander, how you think things might change with the new administration in the US. A lot of people put the blame, as they see it, on the Bush administration. How do you think things will change under Barack Obama?
Well, I think President-elect Obama is going to outlaw torture across all agencies. I think that'll be one of his first initiatives. What I'd like to see is, in addition to that, the way we train interrogators improve. There was tried and true methods that we knew worked in World War II based on relationship building, but we went away from that at some point after 9/11. And we've got to return to that tradition of using relationship building approaches which are most effective, work the quickest, and adhere to American principles. And in addition to that, we need to hire a cadre or contract a cadre of experienced police or law enforcement officials who can teach our interrogators how to use those types of techniques.
Listen, we're out of time. Matthew Alexander and David Rifkin, pleasure to have you both on the show. Thank you.
Good to be with you.
And thank you for being with us. On the next show, we explore the quickly disintegrating situation in Somalia, where insurgents are in control of much of the country, pirates control the shorelines, and the prospects of famine are rising. Now the US-backed government's falling apart. What's in store for this African nation? Join us for that. We'll see you next time.